There's power in silence, not the kind that's awkward or forced, but the kind that comes when you stop explaining yourself to people who only listen to respond. The kind that comes when you've said everything you could say and realized it still wasn't enough. So you stop, not out of defeat, out of wisdom, because some things can't be fixed with words. Some situations require you to be still, to say nothing, to protect your energy by choosing not to respond at all. We live in a world that never stops talking. Voices everywhere, opinions stacked on opinions, noise that fills every quiet moment. It's overwhelming. Every minute someone's trying to be louder, smarter, faster, more visible. But few are honest. Few are still. Few are truly present. Silence feels rare. It makes people uncomfortable. So they avoid it. They cover it with small talk, with notification, with distractions. But that quiet you're avoiding, it holds answers. It holds clarity, and sometimes it holds the version of you that got buried beneath all the noise. You don't need to respond to everything. You don't have to correct every misunderstanding or defend every part of yourself. That's exhausting, draining. Not every battle is worth your voice. Not every insult needs a reaction. Silence is not weakness. It's control. You get to choose when to speak, when to walk away, when to let your peace do the talking. Some people will think silence is giving up. Let them think that. Those who know you won't need an explanation, and those who don't never deserved one in the first place. Think about how much you've already said in your life. How many times you've tried to explain your heart to people who weren't really listening. How many moments you've over-explained to avoid being misunderstood. How often you've reacted just to feel seen. And what did it give you? Maybe a moment of relief, but the cost? Your peace, your sleep, your energy, and most of all, yourself. There comes a point when the most powerful thing you can do is go quiet, not because you're hiding, not because you're afraid, but because you're done performing. You don't need the spotlight. You don't need validation. You need alignment. Silence is where that starts. It's where healing begins, where growth takes root. In that still space where the world isn't screaming at you and you're not screaming back. You won't find clarity through constant reaction. You won't find strength in noise. Real power is silent. It's the moment you no longer feel the urge to prove anything. When you stop broadcasting your pain and start tending to it in silence. That's when the shift happens. That's when you realize silence isn't emptiness. It's full of meaning. It's full of you. Not the version the world expects. The version you've been needing to return to all along. And so be silent. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally know what matters, and it doesn't need an audience. The world doesn't pause. It keeps talking, loudly, endlessly. There's always something new to hear, to react to argue about. Notifications pile up, opinions fly across screens faster than thoughts can form. Everyone speaks louder, types faster, posts quicker. There's barely time to think, barely time to breathe. The pressure to respond is constant, to keep up, keep sharing, keep proving. If you go quiet, they think something's wrong. If you don't say anything, they assume you don't care. So people talk, even when they have nothing to say. Noise comes in many forms, not just sound. It's comparison. It's judgment, it's opinions disguised as concern, advice from people who never lived your struggle, demands for instant replies, unspoken rules about how to be, what to say, when to speak. Even when you're alone, you're not really alone. The phone glows, the world knocks. Someone always needs something. Even your silence is interrupted by the urge to scroll, to answer, to explain yourself. It's tiring being reachable all the time, being watched all the time, being expected to always perform. People speak more than they listen. They interrupt, they assume. They wait for their turn to talk, not your truth. It's rare to find quiet without judgment, rare to sit with someone who just lets you be. So we've learned to speak for the sake of it, to fill space, to please people, to avoid awkward pauses. But in doing that, we lose our own voice. Not the one we speak with, the one we think with, the one that tells us what we actually feel, what we actually want. Most people aren't afraid of silence because it's boring. They're afraid of what they might hear in it, their regrets, their insecurities, their own voice saying things they've ignored for too long. The world distracts us for a reason. It gives us everything except space, space to reflect, space to decide for ourselves, and without that space we start living by noise, decisions made through pressure, opinions shaped by trends, emotions buried beneath content we consume just to feel something. Even healing feels rushed now. You're expected to bounce back fast, to share your story while the wound is still open, to make it inspirational before you've even processed it. There's a pressure to be strong in public, even when you're breaking in private. The world romanticizes vulnerability, but only when it's polished and well lit. So people perform pain instead of healing it, speak it instead of sitting with it. We talk about mental health more than ever, but rarely sit still long enough to listen to our own minds. The pressure is real. Always show up, always be available, always reply fast. If you're quiet, you're ghosting. If you slow down, you're falling behind. There's no room to rest, no room to say, not now. But that's the trap, the belief that constant engagement equals connection. It doesn't. Sometimes, silence brings you closer to yourself than any conversation ever could. Because silence doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't perform. It just exists. Silence can be uncomfortable, especially in a world addicted to noise. But that discomfort holds truth. It reveals who we are when no one's looking. It shows us what matters when no one is clapping. When the filters fade and the crowd is gone, you're left with one thing, your own voice. And if you've never been still, you won't recognize it. That's why silence isn't easy. It's powerful. It makes you feel everything you've ignored. But it also gives you back control. Because when you're no longer reacting to the noise, you start choosing your direction. Some people talk to fill their emptiness. Others talk to avoid hearing the truth. But silence doesn't need defending. It's not a weakness. It's a choice, a strength. It means you're not rushing to be understood. You're not trying to win arguments. You're not living for likes. You're centered, not because you're always right, but because you're finally grounded. Not every message deserves a reply. Not every fight deserves your energy. You don't need to win every conversation. Sometimes, not answering is how you protect yourself. Social media made everyone a broadcaster, a brand, a performer. There's a constant need to update, explain, react. Even silence online is loud. People question it. But you don't owe the world your voice all the time. You don't have to speak just because everyone else is. Sometimes saying nothing is how you listen best. Sometimes saying nothing is how you remember who you were before the world told you who to be. There's wisdom in quiet, peace in stillness. But we've been taught the opposite. That loud means confident. That silence means shy or submissive. But silence can be fierce. A boundary, a response, a statement. When someone disrespects you and you say nothing, that silence can speak louder than any comeback. When someone doubts you and you stop explaining, that silence carries weight. It shows you're done arguing about your worth. When you go silent, you reconnect, not just with yourself, but with what matters. You stop absorbing noise and start filtering truth. You remember your values. You see things clearly. You realize most of the pressure is noise, most of the urgency is artificial, and most of the people making the most noise have the least peace. You've spent so much time being available, being responsive, being loud when you had to be. Now you're allowed to be still, to move inward, to be present without needing to prove anything. The world won't understand it at first. People will ask, "What's wrong?" when nothing is. But silence doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be protected, and in that protection you'll find clarity that noise could never give you. The world doesn't stop. Notifications light up your phone. Conversations buzz in the background. Music, traffic, opinions, headlines. It never ends. And after a while, your mind starts to sound just like it. Fast, loud, scattered. There's barely any space between one thought and the next, no pause, no breath, just constant input. So much comes in that you forget what's already there. That's when the exhaustion begins, not from movement, but from never having peace. You start mistaking noise for connection. You start thinking silence means something's wrong. But silence isn't the absence of meaning. Sometimes it's the only way to hear what actually matters. You've spent so much time talking, explaining, reacting, performing, that your own voice got buried. It's still there, underneath the stress, the overthinking, the performing. But it's quiet, and it doesn't fight to be heard. You have to be still to notice it. It's that subtle feeling you get when something feels off, even if no one else sees it. It's the tug in your chest when you're saying yes, but you mean no. It's the tightness behind your smile when you're trying to be okay for everyone else. That's the voice within, the one that doesn't scream. It whispers. And when you keep ignoring it, it stops talking altogether. Then you're just following the noise outside, disconnected from what's true for you. Most people avoid silence because it brings them face to face with themselves, with thoughts they've been pushing aside, with feelings they haven't processed. That quiet becomes uncomfortable fast, but it's in that discomfort that truth shows up. There's clarity in the quiet, but it doesn't rush in. You have to make room for it. You have to turn the volume down on the world to hear what's going on inside you. You might not like everything that surfaces: resentment, regret, guilt, confusion. But they're already there, buried under your distractions. Silence doesn't create problems. It reveals the ones you haven't dealt with, and that's where real change begins. Not from fixing what's outside, but from facing what's within. You don't always need to explain your thoughts to others. Sometimes you just need to understand them yourself. To sit quietly and ask, what am I actually feeling? Not what you should feel, not what others expect you to feel, what you are feeling. That question alone can shift everything. But you can't hear the answer if you're always talking, scrolling, reacting. Stillness isn't natural at first. It feels awkward. You'll want to reach for your phone. You'll want to fill the space. But that's just the habit of distraction. Let it pass. Let the silence settle in. Let the thoughts rise and fall without judgment. Don't rush to label them. Don't fight them. Just listen. You'll be surprised at how much your own mind has to say once it finally gets the floor. It's not about meditating for hours. It's not about escaping to a forest. Sometimes it's just 5 minutes before bed. No noise, no screen, just stillness. That's enough to start hearing your own voice again, the one that doesn't lie, the one that knows when you're forcing something, the one that remembers what you actually want, even if you forgot. That voice is soft but strong. It won't argue, it won't push, but when you listen, it leads you home, back to clarity, back to honesty, back to decisions that don't drain you, back to peace that doesn't rely on other people's approval. That voice knows what you've been through, even if no one else does. It knows the weight you carry and the battles you fight in silence. That's why you need it, because it's the only voice that speaks for you, not at you. And when you start hearing it again, your decisions change. You say no without guilt. You stop chasing people who only show up when it's convenient. You stop explaining your worth to those committed to misunderstanding it. And most of all, you stop abandoning yourself just to make others comfortable. That's what listening gives you. Not answers from the world, but permission from yourself. You'll start noticing when you feel uneasy in a room, when something someone says doesn't sit right, when you're smiling but your chest feels heavy. That's not anxiety, that's self-awareness. That's your body's way of telling you the truth your mind keeps skipping. And the more you listen, the louder that inner voice becomes. Not loud like shouting, but loud like certainty, like knowing, like calm in a storm. There's peace in having your own back, and that starts with silence, with presence, with quiet moments that don't need to be filled. Your voice isn't gone. It's just been waiting for you to slow down, waiting for you to stop pretending, waiting for you to stop asking the world for answers you already hold. It's not about never speaking. It's about knowing when not to. The more you talk over yourself, the more you disconnect from your needs, from your purpose, from your values. But the moment you fall silent, you start remembering who you are, what matters, what you've always known underneath the noise. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something important is. And the only way to feel it is to be still enough to listen. Stillness isn't always calm. Sometimes it's resistance. Sometimes it's the loudest thing in the room. You've already said enough. You've tried to explain yourself. You've defended your name, your heart, your silence, and none of it made a difference. So you stopped. You realized silence wasn't weakness. It was clarity. It was choosing your energy over their chaos, and that changed everything. Not every insult needs a reply. Not every lie deserves correction. There's power in walking away without a single word. Some people want your reaction more than they want your truth. They feed off your energy, your explanation, your emotion. When you stop giving them that, they lose their grip. Silence is a boundary. It's a refusal to participate in things that disrespect your peace. You're not giving in, you're choosing out. There's strength in restraint. People think silence is avoidance, but it's awareness. It says, I heard you, I just don't owe you my voice. It says, you don't control my attention anymore. That unsettles people. They want noise. They want you to fight, to chase, to explain. But when you go quiet, they're left alone with the weight of their own words. That silence, it's a mirror. It forces them to sit with themselves, and most can't handle that. Some people aren't ready for your silence. They'll think you're bitter. They'll call it passive. They'll misread your calm as cold. Let them. You're not responsible for how people interpret your peace. You're responsible for protecting it. There's something sacred about not responding to things that are meant to break you. It's not about proving you're right. It's about proving they no longer have access to disturb you. When you're silent, you start to notice more. You start to hear what people really mean. You see their patterns, their intentions. You become an observer, not a reactor. You take your time. You don't rush to defend yourself. You let people speak, and you let their words reveal what they're hiding. Silence lets the truth come forward without resistance. You begin to understand that not all responses need to be spoken. Sometimes silence says, "I'm done explaining." Other times it says, "This is beneath me." Sometimes it says, "This isn't worth my energy." And often it says, "You're not going to drain me like this again." Silence isn't just quiet, it's selective, it's intentional, it's power, and it's healing. You don't have to match someone's energy just because they want you to. You don't have to meet disrespect with anger. You don't have to meet chaos with argument. Silence lets you choose how you show up instead of being pulled into someone else's storm. That's emotional discipline, and it takes time to build. But once you do, everything shifts. There are people who used to expect a reaction from you. They knew which buttons to push. They knew what to say to get under your skin. Now, you don't flinch, you don't answer, you don't play their game, and that shift unsettles them. They don't know what to do with someone who no longer dances on their strings. They don't know how to function when their manipulation doesn't land. That's silence. It's freedom. You don't lose anything by staying quiet. You gain control. You protect your mental space. You conserve your energy. You stop giving people a front row seat to your emotions. And the people who care, who truly see you, they don't need a loud version of you to feel close. They feel you in your presence, not your volume. You're not here to convince anyone anymore. You're not here to beg people to understand you. If they don't see your heart in your silence, they never really listen to your words either. You've grown tired of performing for people who misunderstand you on purpose. Silence has become your shield. It's where you regain your strength. It's how you hear your own thoughts again. And here's what's real. Sometimes silence is pain. It's the absence of words because the hurt runs too deep. But even then, it's honest. It's you sitting with what's real instead of covering it with noise. You're not numbing. You're processing. You're healing. And even in that silence, there's movement. There's change. There's power. People won't always respect your silence. Some will poke at it, mock it, try to break it. But the ones who value you won't need to. They'll feel it. They'll understand what it took to get there. And they'll meet you in that quiet space, not to fill it, but to sit in it with you. You've realized now that silence doesn't mean you've stopped. It means you've started something stronger, something cleaner, something real. And from here on, not everything deserves your voice. Not everyone earns your reaction. Some things are answered best by walking away, quietly, intentionally, fully aware of your worth. You learn a lot when you stop moving, when you stop reacting to every voice, every alert, every demand. There's a shift that happens inside you. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it doesn't feel exciting at first, but it's real. After the noise, after the draining of energy, you start noticing the power of being still. In stillness, something wakes up in you. Not the frantic part, not the desperate part, but the centered part. The version of you that's quiet, present, and watching everything with sharp awareness. Most people never meet that version of themselves. They're too busy running, explaining, chasing, and pleasing. They never stop long enough to see who they are without the noise. Stillness forces that meeting, not because it demands anything from you, but because it removes everything that doesn't matter, and what's left is raw, pure, true. Stillness is where your thoughts show up without filters, where you see your life as it actually is. No pretending, no escaping. That's why it's uncomfortable at first. It brings up things you've been avoiding: regret, fear, self-doubt, the things you try to push down when you keep yourself distracted. But it also brings clarity. It brings answers you've been chasing in other people's opinions. It brings healing, not the kind that looks good online, but the real kind. But the slow kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. You begin to realize how much time you've spent performing, how often you've worn masks just to feel safe. Stillness pulls all of that away, and it feels raw. It feels strange. But underneath all the roles, all the personas, all the overthinking, there's a grounded you, a version that doesn't need applause to feel valid, a version that doesn't chase chaos just to feel alive. That's what stillness gives you. Not comfort right away, but truth. The world sells productivity as a form of worth. People feel guilty for doing nothing. They rush, they overcommit, they tie their value to how exhausted they are. But the truth is, real clarity never comes in the rush. It comes in the quiet hours. It comes in those long pauses where nothing is happening, yet everything starts making sense. You're not behind when you slow down. You're catching up with yourself. You're reconnecting with your body, your mind, your purpose. Stillness teaches you to respond, not react, to listen without forming a reply, to observe without judgment. That changes how you move. You don't run into things that aren't meant for you. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You become intentional with your time, your words, your presence. That's the kind of strength that doesn't show on the surface, but it transforms your life. The world doesn't understand stillness. It sees it as laziness, as passivity, as weakness. But that's because people fear what they don't control. And stillness can't be controlled. It doesn't ask for attention. It simply exists. And that's threatening to those who need noise to feel important. You don't need that anymore. You're learning to move differently, with less noise, with more purpose. Stillness is where real strategy is born, where the real work happens. You're not always supposed to be seen. Sometimes your silence is the loudest part of your growth, the training no one claps for, the quiet breakthroughs that can't be posted, the emotional discipline of not reacting, not explaining, not proving anything to anyone. That's where your next level begins, not in more effort, but in less chaos. You start seeing the difference between urgency and importance, between energy and noise. Just because something demands your attention doesn't mean it deserves it. Just because someone expects a reply doesn't mean they're entitled to it. Silence makes you powerful because it means you've chosen to be grounded rather than pulled. You begin to master your state. You choose your focus. You protect your peace. And in doing so, you stop letting people dictate your rhythm. That's real power. Not dominance, not aggression, but calm control. A kind of presence that doesn't shout, but is impossible to ignore. Stillness doesn't always mean sitting alone in a room. It can happen in the middle of the day, in the busiest places, when you simply choose not to react. When you pause before responding, when you stay composed when everything around you is chaotic. That's stillness in motion, and it speaks louder than anger ever could. It also teaches you how to rest, not just sleep, but rest. Emotional rest, mental rest, the kind of rest that says, I don't need to be everything to everyone today. That lets you say no without guilt. That gives you permission to sit in silence without needing to explain why. That type of rest resets your nervous system. It slows your breathing. It softens your shoulders. It brings you back to yourself. And when you return to your own center, you return with clarity, not confusion. Stillness also filters your life. It shows you who and what belongs. Some people only exist in chaos. They don't know how to stay when things go quiet, and that's fine. Let them go. Stillness reveals who claps for your peace and who only stayed for your struggle. It shows you what you were holding on to just to avoid the silence. And when that silence becomes home, you stop tolerating noise disguised as connection. You grow more in silence than you do in performance. That's not what society teaches, but it's the truth that changes people. Stillness isn't where life pauses. It's where it begins again, with clarity, focus, and strength no one else gave you. You found it in yourself, in the quiet, and that's what makes it real. You've learned to be still, to breathe before reacting, to hold your ground when the world pulls you in every direction. But stillness alone isn't enough if you're still carrying everyone else's weight. Just because you're silent doesn't mean you're safe. Silence without boundaries is where emotional exhaustion begins. That's why learning to observe without absorbing is the next step. Watching the world unfold without letting it control you. Being present without being consumed. People around you will talk. They'll complain, gossip, project their fears, their pain, their negativity. It's easy to get caught in it, especially when you care, especially when you've been taught to listen, to be there, to stay kind. But there's a difference between being kind and being drained, between being empathetic and being a sponge for chaos. Not everything is yours to fix. Not every conversation deserves your energy. You are allowed to witness without becoming part of the mess. It is power in silence, but there's peace in detachment. And that doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop letting every emotion pass through you like it belongs to you. You've likely walked into rooms and felt the tension without anyone saying a word. You've answered phone calls and known from the first second that something was off. That's sensitivity. That's intuition. And while it's a gift, it becomes a burden when you don't know how to protect it. Being emotionally open doesn't mean you should be emotionally available to everyone. Sometimes people speak in pain, not truth. And if you absorb every word, you start believing it's about you. You start internalizing what isn't yours. That's how doubt grows. That's how people lose themselves, by confusing other people's chaos for their own. Just because someone is angry doesn't mean you caused it. Just because someone is bitter doesn't mean you deserve the sharpness. You can care, but still stay centered. You can love and still let go when it starts to cost your peace. There's a quiet strength in observing without reacting, listening to the noise without joining the volume, watching patterns, seeing who talks over you, who drains your energy, who sparks your anxiety the moment they walk into the room. These aren't random reactions, they're signals. Your body and mind speaking in ways words never could. And when you stop absorbing everything around you, you start hearing yourself clearly. Some people don't want peace. They want attention. They want drama. They want reaction. They feed on chaos and expect you to serve it too. And the more you react, the more they pull. That's how you lose hours, days, emotional balance, overthinking things that had nothing to do with you, carrying stress that was never yours to hold. You owe it to yourself to stop playing that role. Let people be wrong about you. Let them misunderstand your silence. Let them feel unsettled by your calm. That's not your problem. You're not here to perform emotional labor for everyone who refuses to heal. Your job isn't to be a mirror for their pain. You're not required to absorb every broken thing. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Just sit. Just listen. Just watch. Energy is contagious. That's not just a saying. It's biology. Emotional states are transmitted like signals. Your nervous system responds to tension, to chaos, to the moods of others. That's why certain people leave you exhausted after 10 minutes. That's why some conversations leave you feeling small or confused or restless. You're absorbing the charge of what's around you, but you don't have to. You can learn to stay grounded, to stay in your body, to let their energy hit the surface and slide off, like rain on a jacket, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand the cost of carrying what isn't yours. Think about how much lighter your days could feel if you stopped picking up everything people throw at you. Their expectations, their moods, their projections. You weren't built to carry all that. You have your own work to do, your own heart to heal, your own peace to keep, and you're allowed to guard that peace with everything you have. This is not about coldness. This is not about shutting the world out. It's about being selective with your attention, about knowing when to be present and when to step back, about listening without responding, about observing without letting your mind spiral. It takes discipline. It takes self-awareness. But the more you practice it, the stronger your energy becomes. Not everything deserves your reaction. Not everyone deserves access to your emotional world. Silence is not avoidance. It's preservation. Watching the storm without getting wet. Hearing the noise without letting it control your heart rate. You are not required to absorb every conflict. You are allowed to protect your focus, to move quietly, to let other people unravel without it meaning anything about you. The more you observe without absorbing, the clearer everything becomes. You see patterns. You notice intentions. You catch the subtleties most miss, and from that place you can choose wisely. Who to keep close, what to engage in, what to release. Life becomes less about surviving noise and more about protecting quiet. It's not easy, especially when you are taught to over-explain, to apologize, to fix. But growth often looks like silence, like a pause instead of a reaction, like a breath instead of a reply. You are not a container for everyone's emotions. You are your own person, with your own balance to maintain. Next time you feel pulled into someone's chaos, stop. Ask yourself, does this belong to me? Is this mine to carry? If the answer is no, step back, watch, but don't absorb. You've earned that peace. Keep it. Silence teaches you what words never could. After the chaos, after the noise, after the world has said too much or nothing at all, you're left with the quiet. And in that quiet, healing begins. Not because you're doing anything grand or dramatic, but because you're finally not doing what hurt you. You're no longer responding to every voice. You're no longer explaining yourself to those who never listened. You're not forcing peace where there was none. You're just sitting with yourself, for once without judgment. Healing doesn't ask for noise. It doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't need the world to know what you're going through. Most of the time, it asks for silence. Not the silence of indifference, but the silence of space. Space to feel, space to cry, space to process what happened and how it changed you. You don't have to post it. You don't have to prove you're better. You don't even have to tell anyone you're hurting. You can just feel it, quietly, honestly, fully. There's a pressure in the world to turn pain into content, to explain your grief while it's still fresh, to make your struggle sound poetic while it's still bleeding. But you don't owe your pain to anyone. Some wounds are meant to be wrapped in silence until they close. Some things are sacred. Some things are too real to be shared before they've finished shaping you. Silence is not hiding. Silence is honoring what's personal. You don't have to speak every time you're hurting. You don't need to be understood in the middle of your breakdown. Most people wouldn't understand it anyway, not because they don't care, but because they're not in it with you. And that's okay. Healing happens in those quiet moments when you're sitting with your emotions, not trying to make them prettier, not trying to rush them, just letting them pass through you. It's in the moment where you're not okay, but you're not fighting it anymore. That's where the shift begins. Some days, healing looks like saying nothing and just surviving, getting through the day without forcing a smile, letting yourself breathe without explaining why you're not as cheerful as you used to be. You're not the same, and that's allowed. Growth doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like silence. You're processing more than you're sharing. That doesn't mean you're closed off. It means you're taking your time with what's fragile. The most meaningful healing isn't loud. It doesn't need a witness. You start to find peace in sitting alone, not because you want to isolate yourself, but because solitude stops hurting. You start enjoying your own company. The thoughts that once scared you start to soften. The weight that once crushed you starts to lift. And you realize you were never broken. You were just overwhelmed. Your silence isn't avoidance. It's clarity. People will ask if you're okay. You might not know how to answer. That's normal. Healing doesn't come with clear timelines. There's no finish line. There's no before and after that makes perfect sense. It's a messy middle. It's a slow burn. Some days you'll think you've moved on, only to wake up hurting again. That doesn't mean you've gone backward. It means you're human. And healing is not linear. In the quiet, you begin to forgive yourself for what you allowed, for who you stayed with too long, for how much of yourself you gave away just to be accepted. You start to see how much of your identity was shaped by what you tolerated. And in that silence, you slowly rewrite it. You start choosing better, not out of anger, but out of peace. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to rest without shame, and you begin to speak only when it adds to your peace. There are some emotions you'll never find words for, some memories that don't need retelling. You don't need to name everything to heal from it. Some of it just needs silence, time, stillness, letting it sit in the background without defining you anymore. It was part of your story, but it's not who you are. You don't need to relive it every time you talk about it. Some parts of your healing are for you and you alone. People might not notice your healing. They might say you've changed, like it's a bad thing. But that change didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, quietly, in those silent moments where you stopped pretending. You stopped seeking approval. You stopped explaining why you were distant. You just started choosing yourself. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. Every day you chose a little more peace, a little less chaos. Healing in silence doesn't mean you have to stay silent forever. It means you're giving yourself the pause you were never allowed, the space to rebuild before you reappear. And when you speak again, your words will come from a stronger place, a quieter place. You won't speak to prove anything. You'll speak from peace, from truth. And that's what makes your voice unshakable. You've carried pain that would have broken someone else, but you're still here, breathing, learning, growing, quietly, steadily. You're healing in your own way, on your own time, and no one gets to rush that. Not the world, not your past, not even you. Be patient with the silence. It's not empty. It's full of rebuilding, and you're doing it one silent moment at a time. Silence teaches you something most people never learn. Being misunderstood is not a crisis. It doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be defended. After staying quiet long enough, you begin to see that explaining yourself to everyone is draining, exhausting, pointless. Some people never wanted to understand you in the first place. They just wanted to argue, to twist your words, to make you smaller so they could feel bigger. You spent years trying to make everyone feel comfortable with your choices, with your pain, with your growth. You watered yourself down so they wouldn't feel left out. You over-explained so they wouldn't misinterpret your silence as arrogance. You let them in too far, thinking that if they just saw your heart, they would understand it. But not everyone deserves access to what's sacred inside you, and not everyone will respect it when they see it. There comes a point where you stop trying to be understood, and you start trying to be honest with yourself. Some people don't want clarity, they want control. The more you explain, the more ammunition you give them. They use your transparency against you, and you realize that the less they know, the less they can misrepresent. Silence becomes protection. Peace becomes privacy. There's freedom in accepting that people will get you wrong, that they'll talk about you like they know you. They'll label you based on a version of you that no longer exists. They'll hold you to standards they don't hold themselves to, and you stop correcting them. You stop offering footnotes for your decisions. Let them think what they want. It's not your job to correct every lie or erase every misunderstanding. Your peace is too expensive to trade for approval. You're not made for everyone to understand. Some people will never relate to your silence, your standards, your growth. That's okay. You're not for everyone. You're not supposed to be. Growth alienates those who preferred you broken. Healing offends those who thrived on your pain. Maturity feels threatening to people who stayed stuck. And when you stop trying to be liked, when you stop performing, watch how free you become. You don't need to post about every step. You don't need to explain why you pulled back, why you said no, why you left that situation, that job, that relationship. If it brought you peace, that's the only explanation you need, and that belongs to you alone. You owe silence to the noise. Not everyone deserves your story. Not every connection deserves a closing sentence. Being misunderstood used to bother you. It used to keep you up at night. You'd go over conversations in your head, wondering if you said the wrong thing. You'd want to reach out, clear the air. But now you realize if they cared, they would have asked. If they were meant to stay, they wouldn't have left confused. Silence showed you that your peace doesn't come from others seeing your side. It comes from knowing your side is enough, even when no one sees it. You can still be kind without being available. You can still care without giving access. You can still wish them well and walk away. Don't explain your boundaries. Don't justify your stillness. You're not rude. You're not cold. You're protecting what you built. And that's sacred. People will misunderstand you when you stop oversharing, when you stop fixing, helping, overgiving. But that doesn't mean you've changed for the worse. It means you finally started choosing yourself. That can look like selfishness to those who only liked you when you were giving them pieces of your soul. Let them talk. Let them assume. Let them spin stories that help them sleep at night. Their version of you is not your responsibility. The real ones will sense you without needing explanation. They'll understand your silence without taking it personally, and when you find people who can sit with your quiet and still respect you, that's when you know you're seen. Silence teaches you that not every connection is meant to last. Not every conversation needs closure, and not every person is entitled to your truth. You've spoken enough. You've given enough. Now you protect your energy. You sit with yourself, and that's more than enough. You've stopped explaining yourself, stopped trying to convince people of your intentions, stopped defending choices they never tried to understand. Silence is no longer a defense mechanism. It's a calculated decision, not out of fear, but out of control. When you quiet the noise, you begin to move differently, with purpose, with awareness, with distance between you and their distractions. Silence can look passive from the outside, but internally it's focused on what matters, not on pleasing others, not on reacting to every opinion, not on proving anything. You've reached a point where your peace matters more than being seen. The loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. The one who sits still, listens, watches, and chooses their moment, that's the one in control. Not everything needs to be announced. Your goals don't need to be broadcast. Your next move doesn't require applause. When you talk too much, you invite resistance, doubt, delay. People want to measure your steps before you even take them. And some only listen to criticize. Some are only close enough to sabotage. Silence protects you from premature judgment. It gives you time, space, options. Planning in silence is strategic. You don't owe anyone the blueprint to your future. Keep it between you and your effort. Let your progress show what your words didn't. Some of the strongest shifts in your life will happen when you stop announcing and start executing. You've learned that talking can feel like progress, but it's often a trap. Too many words and your energy gets scattered. Your vision starts being shaped by how others see it. That's why you stay quiet now, because clarity lives in privacy. There's a kind of discipline in not reacting. People poke to get a rise out of you. They test your boundaries. Some even wait for your anger just to call you emotional. But when you remain still, when your silence answers what words can't, you keep your power. It bothers them more than yelling ever would. Not because you're ignoring them. There's also a timing to silence. You learn when to pause, when to let things settle, when to wait before responding. Not every opportunity needs an instant yes. Not every conflict deserves your reply. Some people come around just to pull you out of peace. Some situations are designed to test if you've really changed. Silence lets you evaluate without pressure, without performance. It gives you control over your emotional reactions. You don't post every win now. You don't share every good thing too early. Not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting it. Because you've learned that not everything sacred should be public. Growth becomes stronger when it's nurtured in silence. You're not showing off anymore. You're working, building, preparing. That's why you keep things close to your chest. There's a sacredness in not being easily read. People might say you've gone cold, quiet, distant. Let them. What they call distant, you call focused. What they call mysterious, you call peace. There's nothing wrong with being misunderstood by those who were never meant to know the full version of you. The more you grow, the more selective you become with what you share. Silence becomes a shield, a filter, a tool. You still speak, but only when it matters. Even pain, you've stopped explaining. You don't cry out to be pitied. You heal privately now. You release through silence. And in doing so, you don't give people the power to use your pain against you. You don't narrate every setback. You just get up quietly, adjust, and keep moving. That's the strategy. Move without noise, recover without drama, win without announcement. And when success does come, and it will, it won't be a surprise to you, because you worked for it in the dark. It may shock others, but to you, it'll feel right, earned, because while they were watching noise, you were building in quiet. That's how silent strategy works. It's not about hiding. It's about focusing, holding your energy, speaking only when necessary, and understanding that not every move needs to be seen to be real. Not every word needs to be spoken to be felt. So now you stay still when others rush. You pause when others panic. You listen when others interrupt. You wait when others force. And in the silence you find your advantage. You stop reacting. You start observing. You learn. You reposition. You build. Quietly, relentlessly, carefully. And that's why silence isn't emptiness. It's strategy. One they'll never see coming. You've learned that silence is not the absence of words. It's the presence of power. You've stopped reacting to noise. You no longer feel the need to correct everyone, explain everything, defend yourself every time you're misunderstood. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts. Not everyone earns the right to hear your voice. The more you've stayed quiet, the more peace you've found. Not because you're afraid, not because you gave up, but because your energy is now sacred, because you finally understood that silence protects what noise always tries to steal, your clarity. You don't interrupt chaos anymore, you observe it. You watch what used to trigger you. You no longer jump to prove anything, and it confuses people. They don't know how to handle the version of you that doesn't react. But that's the point. You've outgrown the need for attention. You stopped performing for those who never saw the effort behind your kindness. Silence gave you that. It gave you room to think, room to heal, room to rebuild without pressure, without eyes, without noise. And in that quiet, you didn't lose yourself. You found your strength. Not everyone deserves an answer. Not every comment needs a clapback. Silence gives space between impulse and response, and in that space, growth happens. You've been learning to pause, to reflect, to stop rushing into every conflict that doesn't serve you. Not because you can't win the argument, but because your peace is worth more than being right. You've realized you don't have to speak to be heard. You don't have to shout to make an impact. Sometimes your silence is the loudest thing in the room. And the most powerful part? You're okay with people not knowing what's next. They don't see what you're building. They don't know what you're healing from, and they don't have to. You're no longer interested in announcements. You move in silence now. Quiet days, quiet wins, quiet strength. That's how you're building your future. You let your actions carry the weight. You let your presence do the talking. You've stopped forcing people to understand. You've stopped trying to be heard by those who refuse to listen. Silence isn't about disappearing. It's about protecting your growth, guarding your focus, listening to yourself before the world gets a say. The quiet you used to fear has now become your safest space. It's where you think clearly. It's where you reconnect. It's where you see who really shows up when you're no longer loud. And it's where you build the kind of life that doesn't depend on approval. You've learned to be still. You've learned to wait. And in that waiting, you've grown into someone you barely recognize, but someone you fully respect. That's the power of silence. It doesn't announce the change. It becomes the change.